I hate to say it, but the MCU is burning me out. Now, I am not just another YouTuber out there that says that everything after Endgame was terrible. There have been some really great gems, like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, the most recent movie, was phenomenal. Probably the best thing since Endgame, and honestly, one of my favorite, probably top 3 MCU movies as a whole. So there's definitely been some great stuff that's come out since Endgame, but as a whole, phases 4 and 5 are just absolutely burning me out. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we talk about all things video games, comic books, TV shows, and more. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss an episode like this, since there is probably a video on this channel that you might be interested in. Now, I want to give just a little bit of background. I am a huge MCU fan. I really am. Despite that intro, I absolutely love the MCU. Despite its faults, I don't praise it from the heavens. I don't think that it's perfect, but honestly, the MCU overall is great. It's not perfect. It has its shortcomings, but it's great, in my opinion. I am just a huge fan of phases 1 through 3 specifically, but there's definitely some great gems out there in phase 4. There's a lot to love in Wandavision. In my opinion, there's a lot to love in Doctor Strange 2. Some stuff to love in Thor, Love and Thunder, and just other projects. Again, none of these movies or TV shows are perfect, but there's definitely some elements that I have personally enjoyed. But with all that said, I feel that the biggest problem with the MCU right now, that is what is giving me the burnout, is the lack of direction in phases 4 and 5. Now, you could say that the multiverse is the direction of these phases since Endgame, and you're probably partially true, and I think ultimately that's kind of where it's going to end up, but there's lots of different directions and different things, different plot points that they're trying to get through to us in the MCU overall, and even to the point where Daredevil having a 22 episode series in phase 5, I have no idea how that's supposed to relate to the grander picture of the multiverse. And you could say that, you know, this is kind of like comic books where not everything has to be super integral and connected. But honestly, from a narrative standpoint and just for keeping all of the fans on board, especially the casual fans that are looking over and seeing Endgame happened over here, now we have a Spider-Man movie with all 3 Spider-Men. Oh, and there's also this guy running around in bandages that talks to an Egyptian god. Oh, and then also over here, Wanda, Scarlet Witch is kind of crazy. For the casual person that just wants to see what's going on in the MCU, there's a lot of setup that you kind of have to do before you watch any of these other movies. Now, with all that said, what kind of bothers me, at least of what I've seen in a lot of phase 4 and a little bit less so in phase 5, but is just the sheer number of projects. There have been a crazy number of projects in phase 4. Yeah, phase 4 started just after Far From Home, I believe, was the last official entry of phase 3. And since then, we've had a lot of different projects. We have all the TV shows, the movies, everything that's been going on, and it just feels like, again, I'm just another voice in the sea here, but it feels like we are sacrificing quality over quantity. And my problem with that is when the shows first started off, like WandaVision and some of the other shows, they started off very intriguing. And I think the one show that has remained consistently interesting overall, not just in the first viewing of it, but also as time has passed, has it aged well? I think the best show that has done that is Loki, in my opinion. Now, my second favorite is Captain America, or at least, you know, Falcon and Winter Soldier, now Captain America and Winter Soldier, but that's just because he's a personal favorite of mine. But overall, I think Loki thematically has started off very interesting and very divergent from what was originating in phases 1 through 3, and stayed that way all the way through. Now, season 2, I'm a little interested to see where they go with that, especially with some of the controversies and things going on with Jonathan Majors and his role as Kang moving forward. But honestly, there have been some great theories that I might cover here on the channel of what they might do with Kang if they were to do anything with his character, or if they were supposed to do anything going on, you know, past because there is some controversies, and I don't want to get into all of that, but unfortunately they're trying to figure out what they're going to do and what direction they're going to go. But with Loki being the prime example of an interesting show from start to finish, Wandavision, which in my opinion is a bit of a letdown, mainly because it started off so interesting, so intriguing, and every episode ended with such an interesting cliffhanger, and then the last episode happened and it basically just kept on with what the MCU was doing, where basically just at the end of a project, at the end of all the movies, there was just a big battle that just had to happen. And that's another issue that I kind of have, is just it seems like almost every project, whether it's a TV show or a movie, has to end with some sort of epic battle. And you could say that that's what they have to do at this point with how big they are. But honestly, that's not really what has to happen. There's extremely creative things that happen, like Loki, for instance, didn't have this huge epic war going on at the end of the season. It ended very intimately and quietly with just pretty much 3 people on screen. You have Loki, Sylvie, and He Who Remains. Now, you could say that, because of how epic things are, we have to end things with a war, and we have to end things with a big epic battle, and that's what you have to do for the average viewer to know that things are coming to a close. And that's sort of true, but it's also a big shame, because there are so many creative things that you can do. Again, look at how Loki ended and some of the other projects, that you don't have to end such an interesting show like WandaVision that started off so intriguing and ended in such a cookie cutter MCU format way with just this big epic battle at the end. Or Moon Knight, a big epic battle at the end. Now, Moon Knight is one of my favorite characters in the Marvel universe as a whole, but I'm not very much a fan of how that show ended, because again, it just had this epic battle just for the sake of an epic battle. Thor Love and Thunder, it was honestly a very good time in the theater when I first saw it, but wanting to see it again, I would honestly rather watch Ragnarok over that. I would honestly rather watch the first Thor over that. Now, I'd probably watch Love and Thunder over, Thor 2 pretty much any day of the week. But Thor Love and Thunder just really degraded Thor as a whole in his overall character and morality in a way that just kind of cheapened him. And it just cheapened him as a whole, to a point where I feel that it just did him a disservice to have this 4th movie, because ultimately the only thing you got out of Thor Love and Thunder is that now Thor is a dad, sort of, but they could have done that in a much more interesting and true to character form that they have spent so long building to in the Thor movies, in the Avengers movies, and I was really looking forward to seeing how they were going to do this sort of redemption arc for him after Endgame, and him really getting back into the groove of being a hero, recognizing that you're still worthy despite having these shortcomings and despite being a failure in some senses of the word and some actions as well, but just getting over that and just choosing to pick up the mantle of being a hero and defining what a hero really means. And then we get Thor as a comedy act for 2.5 hours. She-Hulk was another rather interesting show. Personally, I didn't like She-Hulk really at all when I first watched it, but then in retrospect, I'm starting to like where they were going with it in the beginning, of sort of each episode kind of feeling episodic, not really feeding into a bigger, grander scheme, which is totally fine now that I look back at it, in retrospect. When I was first watching it, I was wondering, how is this supposed to connect to anything? What's the point of this? And I was just getting frustrated after every episode because I felt like I just wasn't getting anywhere. But in retrospect, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I wasn't a fan of how it ended and how crazy of a fourth wall break that was. It was just something I just was not interested in at the time, and I still am not now. Of course, that is kind of true to her character in the comics, but I think it was a bit much for it to be in the MCU as it was, and it might have been something that could have been better reserved for in a second season, or maybe if there was going to be a spin-off show with She-Hulk and the Hulk and Scar and, something like that. Maybe some kind of big world-breaking, fourth wall-breaking sort of thing. But again, we got what we got, and in my opinion, it wasn't the best. And that's just kind of where I'm at now with the MCU, is I feel like we're getting projects and projects and projects, and they are adaptations like Secret Invasion of big stories. So it's not like we're getting a bunch of random side stories that nobody cares about. There are some adaptations of some of these things, but they're just not very good. They're just kind of passable. And it's kind of like how Age of Ultron was as an adaptation of just bringing Ultron into the Marvel Universe as a whole and just the ramifications of a character like Ultron. That was an interesting adaptation, although it wasn't the best. That's how I'm kind of feeling the whole Phase 4 and 5 is, just as a whole, because of some of these adaptations that they're doing. They're passable at best, but they could honestly be better. And so that's kind of how I'm feeling about Phase 4 and 5. Right now, I'm feeling a little bit of a burnout, but again, Guardians 3, the most recent Phase 5 project, Loki Season 2 I'm really looking forward to, and Captain America Brave New World I'm looking forward to, Deadpool 3 I'm looking forward to, so there's definitely some things to look forward to, and while the movies may not be perfect, they are, unless they completely screw them up, they can't be bad. But I will reserve my judgment until I actually watch the movies. But with that said, that's all I got as far as the MCU. Now, if you are interested in video games, and if you are interested in The Legend of Zelda, definitely check out this video where I go over my thoughts on probably one of the best video games of all time, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace.